Okay, here we are. So in Sanguttara 514, at one time the Buddha was staying in the land of the Magandas at Andakavinda. Then Venerable Ananda went up to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and the Buddha said to him, Ananda, those bhikkhus who are junior, recently gone forth, newly come to this teaching and discipline, should be encouraged, supported, and established in 5 things. They should be encouraged, supported, and established in restraint by the monastic code. Venerables, please be virtuous. Live restrained in the monastic code, conducing yourselves well and seeking alms in suitable places. Seeing danger in the slightest fault, keep the rules you've undertaken. They should be encouraged, supported, and established in sense restraint. Number 2. Venerables, please live with sense doors guarded, remembering to be judicious and on guard with a mind guarded by recollection. They should be encouraged, supported, and established in limiting their speech. Venerables, speak little, put a limit on your speech. They should be encouraged, supported, established in seclusion. Venerables, please be forest dwellers, frequent remote lodgings in the wilderness and the forest. They should be encouraged, supported, and established in the right perspective, in the right view. Venerables, please have right view and right perspective. So those bhikkhus who are junior, recently gone forth, newly come to this teaching and discipline, should be encouraged, supported, and established in these 5 things. So, go back to the beginning. Obviously, the reason I picked this sutta because it is kind of one of the clear suttas that addresses people that are putujana, pretty much. That says clearly, explicitly, those who are recently gone forth, those who are new to this, those who have not established themselves as in the virtue as a Sotapatti and so on, this is what they should be encouraged in order to develop the right view. So the obvious, please be virtuous. So please live restrained by the precepts. So obviously it talks about the monks here, so it's referring to the monastic code, but generally 8 precepts, as in that which emulates the precepts of the monks, really, the basis of the holy life, how the sutta say, is what constitutes virtue. So it is what constitutes that first thing that a person new to the teaching, i.e. a putujana, should be encouraged in. So live restrained by the precepts, conduct yourself well, don't have unsuitable means of gaining livelihood and so on. So although it's, as I said, addressed to the monks, it can obviously be, the principles can be extrapolated onto anybody who wants to practice, whether they're a layperson or not, it doesn't matter. So seeing the danger in the slightest fault, in other words, take it on seriously, keep the rules you've undertaken, because that's the beginning of that right training towards the right view. So further, they should be encouraged, supported, established in sense restraint. So this is now like on the level of, so okay, you're not breaking the virtue anymore, you have been established in the precepts, you are able to contain yourself within that, but now on a more subtler level, in a way, you need to be paying attention to what you choose to attend and what for. So like it becomes a bit more specific in the sense you're guarding the sense doors. In other words, even before you would have looked or acted towards things, you foresee the impact that would have on sense doors, on your senses. So you guard it by not even allowing it to come across that. So basically avoid unsuitable places, avoid unsuitable sights, sounds, smell, taste, touches, because you know what will come through the sense doors. That's why remember to be judicious and on guard. So to prevent things from arising unnecessarily, to be unnecessarily bothered by hindrances, basically, and by mind overwhelmed by lust, aversion, and so on. All of that can be avoided if you guard your sense doors. That's why the mind is guarded by recollection. It's guided by sati. It's guided by that right context. So you know the context that you want to develop. You know what you need to protect. Then you will immediately know what's unsuitable for it. And then don't pretend that you don't know it Instead, use it to, okay, no, I won't go there. Although I might think I could handle it, the point is I need to prevent the senses to even get in touch with these things, even if I can handle it. Because there'll be plenty of opportunities that you can't prevent, and the senses will be bombarded. And then you can practice your handling of it. But there is no reason to give in to that when it's not necessary. So the third thing, they should be encouraged, supported, established in limiting their speech. So speak little, put limit on your speech. Obviously, other suttas address this as well. Speak truthfully, don't engage in pointless chit-chat, tale-bearing, gossip, backstabbing, all that stuff. Slander, like gets properly unwholesome. So, because that's pretty much the next layer of that will be ripe for improvement, to put it that way. Fourth thing, they should be encouraged, supported, and established in seclusion. So the actual physical seclusion. So if your environment does not necessarily always provide you opportunity for seclusion, well, whenever you can, you seek it. So frequent remote lodgings in the wilderness and the forest. Even monks, frequent. It doesn't necessarily mean go and live there permanently, but whenever you can, go there and spend time. We'll see why that's important later when we address the more specific questions. And then the fifth thing that should be encouraged, supported, and is venerables, please have the right view and the right perspective. So that's kind of almost, it can be, I guess, a bit confusing, as in like, well, so what? You just encourage somebody to have the right view and they'll have the right view. Well, in a way, yes. If they have completed and developed and purified all the previous steps that are clearly outlined in a certain sequence, then you don't need a lot of knowledge or theory to understand what the root of suffering is. So in other words, all the theory that you know now, all the information that you have now, all the connections, parallels, insights that you have now on account of studying the suttas, listening the talks, well, the reason you're not Sotapanna is because of all these previous factors that you have not developed. Because very little is enough when the mind becomes pliable. So that's the whole point of these things that a junior monk or a new to the training should be encouraged, is to make this mind pliable. So that then when you start reflecting on the root of suffering, you start thinking about a craving, it will be the craving and the root of suffering you're thinking of. The mind will be seeing that because the mind is not obscured, it's not as wild, and you could direct it, hold on, I need to understand this, and then the mind will stay on that. As opposed to now, when you think you are directing it towards understanding, I don't know, root of suffering, the mind revolves around the idea of the root of suffering. It's not the actual root of suffering, because for that, the mind needs to become pliable and less movable, to put it that way. So that's why it's like, this sounds almost like an instruction, because it is an instruction. Like once you have tamed your mind sufficiently, when it's pliable enough, then, please dwell, recollect, ponder what you learned about the right view, about the Four Noble Truths, about what causes suffering. Any aspect of the Dhamma that comes up, the mind will be able to stay with it. It won't drift off into abstraction and theory and the external standpoint to your own experience. It will be there, applicable. So again, that's why none of these steps are optional or negotiable, because sending the mind in the direction of understanding the Dhamma, if that mind is not tamed and pliable, no such thing is possible. I mean, the same principle extends all the way to arahantship, as other suttas would say. Remember when he fully purifies his mind from the hindrances, establishes on the level of jhana, first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana, how the suttas would describe the whole thing, the maximum development, and then he says he would just then direct his mind. If there were previous lives to remember, the mind would remember. If the divine ear is to be developed, the mind would develop it. Or he would direct it to understand the root of all asavas and abandon them all, and the mind would do it. The mind would abandon it because it has learned to listen to you, to trust you, and basically above all to not resist you. So that's why the last part, it does involve active effort in terms of trying to really understand what the root of dukkha is, but it cannot possibly be done if the actual mind is not made pliable enough through the previous steps that have to remain there. maintained, protected, built upon. So that's why I picked this sutta, because the entire principle of this training, it doesn't matter if you're a monk, doesn't matter if you're a householder, it remains the same. The pliability of the mind through taming, restraint, mindfulness. And by the way, you might have noticed that there is absolutely no mention of meditation, as in not the concentration practices, not even mention of samadhi for that matter, any in this sutta, as any of the steps. Because how can you be composing and unifying your mind, whichever translation you want to use, if you're not even seeing your chitta for what it is? If you haven't even tamed it to understand it as that phenomenon, as that entity that lives in the heart of your being, as I often say. So the whole well, I mean, we said that many times, that the whole practice today is just upside down. But the point is, even the right samadhi, there is no place for it here, because that can come only once there is actually right view, right perspective. As many other suttas would say, and say exactly that. The right view comes first. So in this case, the right view comes first as the beginning of the actual Sotapatti, the beginning of the actual knowledge of what the training is. But you could see that right view depends on these conditions that have to be developed. So if you wonder, how do I begin practicing? Well, wonder no more. You begin by virtue, sense restraint, recollection, taking care of your speech, not letting slip or engage, allow unwholesome intentions to express themselves through speech, because obviously, okay, actions you let's say you covered. Then apply the same thing to the mind. That's the whole point of the seclusion, withdrawal. When your own thoughts get more amplified, that whole thing becomes more palpable, more visible, more more acute, more real, less abstract, less fleeting. It's harder to ignore it. All of that comes with seclusion. And so, yeah, you have clearly outlined steps that you could even do as a Putujana. So you don't need to be trying to get, Sotapatti through, like, yeah, well, I know practice starts with Sotapatti, but I don't know how to get there, so I'm just doing everything and nothing. It describes how you get there. And as I said, even when you think about Sotapatti now, even if you think in the right terms, the reason why that does not result in you becoming a Sotapanna is because the mind is not pliable enough. So how do you make it pliable enough? Well, it's pretty clear and pretty straightforward in a way. But it does boil down to actual training and doing and repetition. So it's not given. It doesn't fall from sky. And then you just get the right view, and then you do the right work and stuff like that. So the few questions that we also can ask on the basis of the sutta from the start, like, what does it mean to see the danger in the slightest fault? Like, practically speaking, in your own life, whether you're a monk or a householder, does it mean becoming neurotic about everything and nothing? Like, everything is dangerous? Or there is some wisdom involved in this. And yes, in the beginning, maybe you might be fearing everything, but fundamentally, it's like seeing the danger in the slightest fault. Well, what's the danger? What's the danger that you're seeing? The danger of what? Are you clear? Are you clear with that? So if you're not, well, that's certainly a reflection you should be engaging in. Because it's not dangerous just because the Buddha said so. You need to see the danger in the slightest fault. So whether it's a big fault or the small fault, there should be the same thread of danger seen in either. So if you're not clear, well, you better become clear. So then, as I said, so how can you then mirror this kind of restraint or precepts, moral commitments? Well, we spoke about it many times. You take on the precepts by body, you protect them. When you break them, you confess them. You don't psychologize, reason, and explain that I wasn't really affected, I had to do it. It doesn't matter, even if you were not affected. The point of confessing them is, admitting, see, breaking the precepts, depending, sometimes precept can be genuinely like a gray area. It's not necessarily, constituting an actual obstacle for the practice. Say you had to eat something in the afternoon because you went to some social function. You didn't really want to, but it would have been just too weird, and you didn't want to stand out and make your Buddhist principles known or whatever. You don't want to be bothered, so you ate something. You didn't mind. See, that in and of itself would not necessarily be an obstacle. But then, not admitting that that was against the precept, not confessing it, that's an obstacle. Using your own reasoning to alleviate the weight of having to confess, having to restart this, that's an obstacle. That's why whenever in the suttas monks or nuns broke the precepts, and then they saw the mistake of their ways, and then they would confess it, the Buddha would say, oh, very good that you confessed it, because confession of your mistake is a growth in your training as a noble disciple. So that's how you start to mirror this. Not that you're never going to break the precepts, but like you have to take on that weight of responsibility that comes with declaring that you're not going to break them, and then breaking them, and then confessing them. Because in that way, you are admitting that, yes, a certain behavior occurred which shouldn't have. So that's how the whole bodily domain gets perfected. And then after that, or concurrent to that, obviously, you'll be trying to develop everything in a way. You keep an eye on your speech, and it goes with the same principle. The precept against the speech includes all the unwholesome forms of speech. So when upon reflection or memory or something, you recognize that, oh yeah, I've been talking carelessly or something, you don't justify it. Oh, but it wasn't against the precepts because I wasn't really angry or wasn't really this. You recognize if it were, you admit it, and then you confess it. But also keep in mind that, yes, the confession can be the growth towards the right practice, but keeping the precept does not mean purity in and of itself. Because sometimes people think taking on the precepts purifies you on its own. Confessing, even when you break, regains that purity. It's like, no. Taking on the precepts puts you in a position to begin purifying yourself. In and of themselves, they do nothing. Well, they might give you blameless existence here and now, as in you won't be getting into trouble. But purification is not defined by precepts or how many you keep them or that you never break them. It's defined by, is your mind tamed on account of taking on the weight of the precepts, taking on the weight of the responsibility behind your actions and intentions and so on. And like many monks fall into that trap. They think by taking on the precepts and not breaking them and everything, they're pure. In and of itself, that's what purity is. That's why often many monks fall into this trap of thinking like, oh, if I can't keep the precepts according to my own abstract standard of this like purity that I think that's defined by the precepts themselves, it's better for me to disrobe. So imagine the irony of it. It's better for me to renounce the entire training than to go against my perceived notion of being pure on account of simply keeping the precepts defined by others. So there are obvious precepts that are not negotiable, but especially when it comes to monk's life, there are many that are just gray area and often depend on the intention. And often the intention is also ignored. So then it's like, basically people start getting off on that kind of high of externally objectified idea of purity comes on account of this set of methods and behaviors. And if I stick to it, I'm pure and I'm magically heading towards Nibbana or whatever. And if I don't, I'm not pure. Either way, you're not pure, basically. You're pure only when you're an Arahant. You're slightly less impure when you're a Sotapanna. So the whole point of that is to enable you to start actually purifying yourself in that right manner. I.e., on the level of the mind and your thoughts, not on the level of adhering to rules and duties, Silabhata Paramasa. So, guarding of the sense doors in daily life, as I said, it involves foreseeing things before your sense doors are even open to them. So it does boil down to mindfulness, context, and recognizing that when you lose context, you basically lose guarding of the sense doors. You forget. So not losing the context, you're guarding the sense doors, even if you're not needing to actively police your eyes, ears, nose, and so on. And also means that, see, by guarding, by not losing the context, when you're guarding your sense doors, if you are then exposed against your will to sights, sounds, you still guard your doors. Those things are still not coming in because you haven't lost the context. You don't guard the doors by, I don't know, in a bus you hear a music and go and rip the cords of the radio so that destroy the speakers or something to protect your senses. No, just don't lose the context. And you are protecting your senses. So the speech part then, as I said, you like simply refraining from pointless speech. It's going to have layers and layers you're going to have to peel off. For somebody who hasn't been restraining the speech, just refraining from saying stuff initially was going to feel like a massive step forward. But once you get used to that, you're going to recognize, okay, there's a further development to be done here. And that's also how you start to notice what kind of effect speaking less carelessly, less pointlessly, what kind of effect that has on the chitta. In other words, your chitta will be not as obscured, and you can become more and more familiar with the signs and characteristics that define it. So, and same with guarding of the sense doors. When it comes to speech, you can also foresee. You could start talking, and it can start on the basis of a wholesome intention. But then you notice you're getting caught up in what's being spoken, back and forth and whatever else, and the intention starts to change. And you foresee that, and you stop it. But then, yes, you have to endure that built up pressure on account of, let me just say one more thing, and stuff like that. But that's the training, putting the limit on speech. That's how you do it. So, dwell in seclusion when you can. So, the purpose of seclusion, as I said, as I already mentioned when we read the Sutta, is to amplify whatever is going on in your chitta, whatever pressures are there, become more revealed, whatever inclinations are coming up, whatever moods, whatever shifts, all of that in seclusion becomes highlighted, because in seclusion you don't have, the distractions and things to engage with are not at the arm's length. So even if you say slip, in terms of mentally you start to entertain unwholesome thoughts and this or that, well, you won't be able to slip too far back in if you're in seclusion, or at least if you're frequently spending time in that seclusion. So that's why physical solitude is necessary to some extent. And even in other suttas where the Buddha said, to become a Sotapanna without grasping signs of your mind, no such thing is possible. To grasp the signs of your mind without having developed at least some degree of delighting in seclusion, no such thing is possible. So you won't be seeing your chitta if you're constantly dwelling in an environment that's crowded and dusty, as the suttas would say. So obviously for monks, seclusion is a bit easier, but not necessarily, depending on what monastery you live in. Sometimes you actually have more say in your seclusion when you're a layman. But you can change the monasteries, you can change the places. But as a layman, whenever you have the opportunity for seclusion, do not neglect it, even if it doesn't feel like a big deal. Dwelling in it, getting used to it, means basically getting used to the signs of your own mind. Especially if it's not just you jump into seclusion or have views that seclusion will magically on its own just make you understand the Dhamma. But no, you are virtuous, you are practicing restraint, you are guarding the sense doors, you are limiting your speech. Then, even if you don't see a direct link between seclusion and stuff, do it whenever you can. And then the benefits will become apparent. So, the right view then, as I already said, you can be encouraged. Please develop right view. Don't neglect those reflections, because the mind is already pliable enough, or at least working in that direction to become so. So with the mind pliable enough, as I said, you do not need refine sort of subtle concepts of the connections, the aggregates, the this, the that. You could just literally start asking yourself questions, even out loud. What is suffering? Like, what is it? When I say suffering, what am I referring to? Here and now. When I remember suffering, what is it that I remember? What am I designating? What phenomenon is there that stands for this suffering that I'm talking about or trying to free myself? And see, those questions now, paired with a pliable mind, they send the mind in that direction. That direction was always there. Suffering was always there, but you never sat with it, so to speak. You never made your mind sit with it. Ask yourself, well, the Buddha said tanha is the root of suffering. What is tanha? What is thirst? What is craving? What is whatever I translated or non-translated? What am I referring to? In this experience, here and now, as a whole, what phenomena is there? Even if it's vague, there has to be something I'm talking about. What is it? Let me understand that. Like, you tried that before? It's going to fall into psychologizations, philosophizing, theory, connections in space and time. Structure is the aggregates, is this, is because of that. But you haven't sat with it. Because if you sit with it, you don't need to talk much, so to speak. You already did the work of taming the mind, making it pliable enough. Then even rightly directed questions would land where they're supposed to land and bring you closer to actually see it for yourself. So that's what the sutta encourages. Like, please have the right view. Develop it so to have it.
So I was reminded of something when you were talking about keeping the precepts and then having this idea that precepts by themselves or keeping the precepts by themselves will somehow result in your becoming pure. And I was reminded there's this story I came across in one of the books by Viktor Frankl where he talks about it's happening in the First World War, and there's a German general standing in the trenches, and beside this German general, there is a Jewish doctor cowering and trembling with fear because, the opposite side is shooting constantly. And the German general says, look at you, the Jew being spineless and afraid, cowering and trembling and standing there, all supposedly courageous and so on and so forth. And the doctor says, well, you said that I'm afraid and I'm here cowering and don't have the courage that you have. But I assure you, if you felt so much fear as I do, I can guarantee you that you'll be long gone from here. And the main idea behind this is that it's not so much about, not, for example, in this particular context, sensing fear, but being able to actually position yourself in such a way that you don't respond to it.
That you don't
And
run
the
away.
same thing, yes, precisely. And the same thing with regards to what you were saying with the precepts. There are people who, for some reason, one reason or another, who would understand these complex comic connections. They don't have issues with following the precepts. It just comes somehow easier to them. And there are people who struggle a lot. And the idea is, again, from what you were saying, it is about the attitude you take and the understanding that you gain from what is happening in the overall process. And this particular story seems to be a very good exemplification of precisely that. Because it's not about, maybe by nature, you're not afraid if somebody's shooting around you. But if you were afraid, if you were trembling like that person, would you still persist or would you run away?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what
So
would
in
you
this
do?
particular sense, I think that what you were trying to say it is the attitude that allows you to develop the overall poise, the overall stance, existential, and the understanding that you gain from that. That this is the purity that comes from keeping the
Exactly. So a person basically that feels affected by keeping the precepts is closer to the development of purity than the person who doesn't, because they took them on account of tremendous inspiration, faith, the authority of Ajahn, the tradition, the culture, the philosophical reasoning. So basically, if precepts are taken rightly, at any given time you recognize that you cannot keep them if you don't want to. There is no external authority or value that dictates keeping the precepts in their own terms. You choose to do it because you chose to do it. And if you take it that way, then they feel a lot different. Because you realize, I could just leave. I could just walk out. I could just turn away from this next second. And that's frightening. Oh, I could run. And it's like, but I don't. I choose not to every single time. But see, it's a lot easier to take on the precepts and place the weight of keeping them on the environment. I keep them because I'll get in trouble if I don't here in this monastery. I keep them because the vast amount of people say I should do so. I keep them because I believe it will help my meditation technique or whatever. Either way, I don't keep them because I choose to keep them every single day whenever I'm reminded of breaking them. I choose to not break them. Then that edge is felt a lot closer. But that's actually the training. So yes, you don't need to go all the time with that edge, but you need to not run away when the weight of the precept is felt on you. Because that's what people would do. People feel it. I bet that German soldier felt the fear and then justified it with his superiority or whatever ideas, convictions, placed him in that position. And that's exactly what would happen to the monks. They would take on the precepts and you feel it, but then you learn the ways in the environment, in the tradition, in this, and then you actively make the effort to not think about you choosing to keep them every time, but to go along with them. And it feels a lot easier. There's a lot less weight on you than if you every single time you recognize that the sole reason for keeping them is because you keep choosing to do so. And that's why I said there's like a useful reflection. Well, actually, a useful reflection that both lay people and monks can do. So for monks, like you should ask yourself, if, say, being a monk is made illegal, and I have to abandon this form, I have to leave the monastery, I have to take the robes off, would my values remain unchanged? Or would I feel relieved? Would I feel absolved from keeping the precepts now? And that shows you exactly where your values are. Because nothing should change. If you want to be free from suffering and practice the Dhamma, there should be no internal change whatsoever, whether you wear robes or not. And there's even that sutta where it says that. Monks, if wearing the robes would make you free from avarice and all this, I would say, yes, go and wear robes and stuff like that. For a lay person who is not committed to that level, but wishes to be committed or thinks he is committed to the level of training, obviously, he's not wearing robes, he doesn't follow that same form, but he should ask himself the opposite question from the opposite direction. Say, I want to be a monk, but I can't. Because I have a wife, I have children, I have to support them. So it's a valid reason. Like, they will go to ruin if I leave. However, ask yourself, that person should ask themselves, if my wife were to come tomorrow and tell me, I actually found another man, and he's going to look after your children like they're his own, I'm going to be obviously fine with him, I prefer him, you are free to go. Would you be relieved by that news? Or would you feel, oh wait, hold on, let's talk about this? And that shows you where your actual values are. Regardless of what you tell yourself, no, I'll become a monk the moment I'm free. Imagine there is a moment you're free. Are you ready? Because you should be. And same for monks. Imagine a moment you can't continue being a monk. Are you ready? Then precepts are kept on the right level, in line with the Dhamma and actually are resulting in training, taming, pliability. So, if you have a good reason to not become a monk, fine. But that does not excuse you from mentally developing the same framework. If you have a valid reason to abandon robes, I don't know, war or something, fine. but that does not excuse you from carrying on the same virtue, the same restraint, the same practice. But more often than not, the entire thing is associated with what you wear. That's where the authority comes from. And that's taken away. People have no internal means to continue in the same direction because they never developed them. Precepts were always kept for them by the tradition, by the culture, by the inspiration, by everything else but myself.
In a certain sense, they come with the package. It's not about using them as means for you to be able to actually engage with, for example, as means that would disclose or reveal the propulsion of greed or repulsion of hatred or the scatteredness of delusion, by preventing you this or that in very concrete specific situations, so the initial steps into the wisdom, but they are literally just forms that you like.
Yeah, they become.
Boxes to have
Even
you
if
tick.
somebody initially feels that weight of that responsibility, as I said, if they're not cultivating it, it's just going to become a form.
Yeah. So they contextualize it in a way of, this is just, part of this embeddedness. And
Exactly. And that's why it's not incidental either that purity becomes synonymous with it. So in other words, if I sustain this form, divorce from that pressure, that's what defines purity. Therefore, I'm pure. Whether I make the effort towards Dhamma or not, it would be good if I do, but if I don't, either way, I'm purified by keeping them. To the point of you even have like almost like monks develop superstitiousness on account of it, whereby I make zero effort to tame the mind or understand the Dhamma, but I take these precepts religiously because that's the protection, the parita, the protection charms and stuff comes from being virtuous. It's like, yes, sure, comes from not doing harm, but you're nowhere near safe from samsara or doing bad stuff ever again because of it, because you're not uprooting anything. So you have to basically disassociate your idea of purity being on the level of just this mere form and recognize that, no, that just enables me to actually do something about it and develop that purity, which can only come if things are uprooted from where they start, which is your chitta, your mind. Needs to be tamed.
You said the last thing, basically, so someone who would initially maybe be confessing a lot might actually be mid to long term, more pure than someone who might
Getting closer to the actual purity, yes.
Exactly, that's what I mean. Yeah. Okay.
Doesn't mean you should go and actively try and break the precepts or something.
Of course.
Because you're gonna come close, you're gonna make mistakes, but when you do, you don't cover that up either. And certainly don't start thinking you're pure because you confessed it.
Of course.
Because, okay, I uttered the words, therefore purity is regained. No, I uttered the words, therefore ability to do something about it is regained.